Hello everyone, welcome to all of you on this YouTube channel Saurabh Goswami History Optional for UPSC, and today we are going to discuss the theme Portuguese arrival in India. This lecture is for history optional students and is a part of paper 2 section A, that is modern Indian history lecture, and this is a subtopic of chapter 1 and the theme is Portuguese arrival in India. So let's discuss this topic. First, let me make it clear that the same topic is also the part of your GS syllabus. All of you might have studied it in your general studies program. Portuguese arrival in India, Dutch presence in India, French presence in India, and British presence in India. But in general studies, we used to cover a few basic details and information about the company, about the important Portuguese governors, a few dimensions of the policies, the reasons for the decline of Portuguese, some important viceroys and their achievements, and finally the reason for the decline of Portuguese in India, cultural continuity also. Okay, so these are 4 or 5 basic areas we used to cover. We also used to cover 1 or 2 part, that is Portuguese settlements in India, Portuguese conflict with the local rulers, for example the conquest of Goa 1510. Such kind of fact and informations are important for GS perspective, but when we used to read this topic with an optional perspective, we need to enter into more details. We also have to look at the same topic from different historiographical outlooks or approaches. We need to discuss a comparative outlook, that what was the difference in the nature of Portuguese, Dutch, French and British imperialism. And the same topic that I discussed, that I said that imperialism and colonialism, this is a chapter from your world history part, and there you need to study about the nature of British imperialism, French imperialism, Dutch imperialism and Portuguese imperialism. So if you will invest some more time here in modern Indian history, so ultimately you will save some time where in world history. If you will not read it in details in modern Indian history, the same you will have to study in world history. So UPSC follows a very different kind of approach, interlinkages. So in order to develop that, we need to develop understanding of the basic concepts. We need to develop the command over the interlinkages between different topics. So let's start this topic, Portuguese arrival in India. We all know that this year 1492 holds a very significant place in the history of India, because it marks the beginning of arrival of Europeans in India, and among these European groups, Portuguese were the first to enter India. We all know the very popular name here, Vasco da Gama. Following the Cape of Good Hope route, he reached India, and in this way he discovered a new sea route. We all know this. The route till this point of Cape of Good Hope was previously discovered by Bartholomew Diaz, but from the Cape of Good Hope to Calicut, this new passage was discovered by Vasco da Gama in 1498. In 1488, Bartholomew Diaz had already reached to this point of Cape of Good Hope. So this was a new addition, that Vasco da Gama reached Calicut, and in this way we see that the Portuguese arrival started. But is it proper to say that Vasco da Gama discovered India? No, it's not proper to say, because when Portuguese entered, India was already a part of interconnected global network. There were trade and commerce with European countries also. From Indus Valley Civilization period, we see there was maritime trade. Cholas period, we see there was maritime trade. Mughal period also, we were using trade and commerce via sea routes. And in this entire trade and commerce which we were doing in these phases, so the core trading network, when we talk about the core trading network, So in this core trading network, three players played very important role before 1498. One important player was Arab merchants. The second important player were Gujarati merchants, and the third important player were Venetian or the merchants from Italy. There were three important players, or you can say that they were the part of core trading network before the Portuguese came to India. And here, when we talk about these three players, so Gujarati merchants, they were dominating the entire trade and commerce of Indian textiles. They were dominating. These Gujarati merchants were dominating. When we talk about Arab merchants, I am only talking about the most important item of trade and commerce. When we talk about Arab merchants, so these Arab merchants were dominating a spices trade. It means that from the Malabar coast to West Asia, the Arab merchants were dominating the entire spice trades. There were other commodities of trade and commerce also. Okay. And what about Venetian merchants? So these Venetian merchants did what? Okay. So they were, you can say that the final distributors of these Venetian merchants were the final distributors of Asian goods in Europe. So they were the final distributors of Asian goods in Europe. Here we are writing Asian goods, not Indian. India is a part of Asia. So they were the final distributors of Asian goods in Europe. And these Venetians did what? Okay. They collected Indian goods and then they used to supply it in different countries of Europe. And in this way, they got enormous profits. They got enormous profit and they were dominating this entire trade and commerce. So this was a chain. And when you talk about Venetians in European trade network, they were the last chain and they were the supplier and they were getting profits. Entire Europe was looking at the Venetians. They were getting a lot of profit from the Asian trade and commerce. This is one point. The Arab merchants, Gujarati merchants. Now the most unique thing here is that like businessmen or merchants are what? They are like the middleman. And unless you work as a middleman, for example, if I am a businessman and if I will try to monopolize the entire market, ultimately this is going to disrupt the sentiments of trade and commerce. If you are a big player in the market, then this is a good marketing strategy. This is a good business strategy that you should let other players survive. If you want to establish complete dominance and control, so this will harm the business in the long run. And here Arab merchants and Indian businessmen, Gujarati business families were having this idea or understanding that in business, we need to develop good trade relations. We need to develop good trade relations with other trading groups and merchants. And we have to work like a middleman only. So here the merchants were using land route for trade and commerce, sea route for trade and commerce, but they never tried to dominate these routes. They never tried to militarize these routes. And India and the other Asian countries were already part of this interconnected global trade network. Now, the second important thing, when you compare Europe and Asia, you will find that Asian countries, especially we are talking in context of India, was largely self-sufficient. I am writing here largely self-sufficient. It means that whatever we needed, a major part of our needs were fulfilled from our country. Okay, it means that we don't need to import from outside. Yes, there were imports, but a major part of our need and requirements that we needed was fulfilled from within the country, and we were an exporting country. It means we were exporting, we were producing more than what we need, we were surplus economy, so we were exporting. And you can say that India was exporting, India was having almost 2/3 export of the world at that time, and we were exporting it to European countries. And in this way we have what? More export and less import. So the balance of trade was favorable for India, and in this way India was getting bullion surplus. Bullion means precious metals like gold and silver. For example, when we are exporting something, we will get money in return. So here the precious metals like gold and silver were the, you can say, like they were the payments. So we were exporting more, and that's why we were having bullion surplus. But the European countries were importing more, and that's why they were having bullion deficit. So they were having bullion deficit. Now the entire European countries were looking to the Venetians, that they are getting more money by having trade and commerce with Asia, and that's why they will like to do trade and commerce. This is a very simple thing, that they will like to do trade and commerce. In this situation, these countries will have desire to do trade and commerce. And at the same time, what we see that Portuguese arrival, what is the date? That is 1498, na? 15th century. At the same time, we see that Europe was facing a crisis, and this is called 15th 16th century crisis. And this crisis was a part of the larger crisis that entire Europe was facing. So look here, 15th 16th century crisis, and Portuguese entered India in 1498. This is what? 15th century. So this is a crisis time in Europe. 15th 16th century crisis. This is a crisis time in Europe. So why Portuguese came to India? I have already discussed the 15th 16th century structural crisis in Europe in my previous video. Let's once again I will make it clear that we use a word, that is structural crisis in Europe. 15th 16th century structural crisis in Europe. What does that mean? A structural crisis simply means what? That the challenges or the crisis like situation which European countries were facing were having long-term impact. Their fundamental structures, the relations of these fundamental structures, all important pillars of economy, society, political system, all these pillars were, you can say, destroying simultaneously. For example, what happened? Feudalism started dismantling 14th century onwards, 14th to 18th century. We see the decline of feudalism. But this feudalism supported many pillars in polity, economy, society. This feudalism was the base structure, and this structure itself was dismantling. So the result was crisis-like situation in entire Europe. Black Death, like all I have discussed in my previous videos. So just I am indicating a few important points here. For example, dismantling feudalism, dismantling feudalism. In last class, I have already discussed this concept in very much detailed. 14th to 18th century, this feudal structure was dismantling. This was one reason. Feudal structure is a land-based system. It depends on agriculture, production and productivity. But when agriculture, production and productivity will come down, people will look for other opportunities to gain money, and for that trade and commerce and all these things will become important. At the same time, there is another important event, and that is fall of Constantinople. This is another important event, fall of Constantinople. The year is 1453 AD, and this is what, 15th century. 1498 Portuguese came to India, and fall of Constantinople year is what, 1453. What happened as a result of fall of Constantinople? So this Constantinople was captured by Ottoman Turks, and now the land route which was used to do trade and commerce with Asian countries was in control of Ottoman Turks. It means new players dominated this land route, control over land route. So if the European countries will do trade and commerce using the same land route, now it is not that much safer, it is insecure, it is costly, expensive, and it is not safer too. And till this point of time, what we see that entire European trade was dominated by Venetians or Italians. It is also said, in other words, that the Mediterranean Sea trade was under the dominance of Venetians at this point of time, that the entire Mediterranean trade was under the dominance of Venetians. And in this trade and commerce, where Venetians are getting enormous profits, the countries like Portugal and Spain were excluded. And the countries like Portugal and Spain were also facing the same crisis or challenges. So they will try to find a overseas solution of their problems, and for that they will look to India. I told you that a spices trade was an important trade here, and this entire spice trade was dominated by Arab merchants from Malabar coast to West Asia, and this trade was very much profitable. Now, what will happen? These spices were luxury items of that time, and there were multiple uses of spices. For example, they were used as food preservatives, they were used as medicines, they were considered as luxury goods, so status goods are also there. Like today, oil is very much important, in the same way spices was one of the most important item that time. And Europeans used to purchase these spices from Asia. And when you will purchase, you will pay money in return. And in this way, there was a problem, and that is known as bullion drain. They are importing spices from Asian countries, they are paying for that, and they are facing a serious problem or challenge, and that is called bullion drain problem. And this is also making their balance of trade deficit, because they are importing more. So this spice trade, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the other European countries will start dreaming that if we will control the spice trade, if we will be able to eliminate the intermediaries or middlemen from this spice trade. Who are the intermediaries or middlemen? So who are the distributors of Asian goods in Europe? Venetians. So Venetians are the middlemen. Arabs were dominating the entire spice trade from Malabar to West Asia. So Arabs are the middlemen or intermediaries. Now European countries, Portugal, Spain were dreaming that if we will eliminate intermediaries like Venetians, like Arabs, then we will get enormous profits. It means once you establish monopoly, once you eliminate intermediaries, you will get a lot of profit. And in last class, in my previous video, I have already discussed that 15th to 17th century, we were seeing that on one side there was feudalism which was dismantling, on the other side the centralized monarchies were coming into existence. And as a result of this, during this 15th to 17th century, what we see that Portugal emerged as a centralized kingdom, and now sea voyages were sponsored voyages. And who was sponsoring these sea voyages? So the state was sponsoring these sea voyages, because now the centralized monarchies have come into existence. It means the sea voyages are now state sponsored, and they are like state enterprises. This is also an important point, that now sea voyages were state sponsored. Sea voyages were state sponsored and they were like state enterprises. So the sea voyages are state sponsored, they are like state enterprises. And you must have heard the name of a ruler, that is Prince Henry the Navigator. Why is called Navigator? Because he was very much keen, ambitious and interested in promoting sea voyages. So what we see that the process of arrival of Europeans started with the Portuguese. And what Portuguese did, the expansion of Portuguese to Asian countries, the expansion of Portuguese to India was supported by state. It was state sponsored, crown sponsored maritime imperialism. This is an important point. Now, when Portuguese came to India, there was a missionary dimension of this event also. When Portuguese came to India, we see that there was a missionary dimension of this event also. And what is that missionary dimension? For example, in medieval age, there were crusades, religious wars between Muslims and Christians. So the crusades or the religious war ended, but the spirit of that crusade can be seen here in Portuguese expansion. It means Portuguese expansion to Asia, Portuguese expansion to India was, in a kind, you can say that it was an extension of the same medieval crusading spirit that was seen. Why we are saying that the spirit of crusades were continued? Because the Portuguese presence in India was having an ambition, motive or desire to promote Christianity. This is an important part. And they were also trying to counter Islam in the Indian Ocean. Like I have already told that the core trading network comprises of three main players. One were the Arabs were the Muslims, and Arabs were having, you can say, the most dominant presence, or they were controlling most of the spices trade from Malabar coast to West Asia. So what will happen? The Portuguese had the ambition to eliminate the intermediaries. So they are trying to eliminate Venetian intermediaries. They are also trying to eliminate the Arab intermediaries. So they are trying to eliminate both these two intermediaries. So if you will try to eliminate Arab intermediaries, it means you are trying to counter Islam also in Indian Ocean. So trade, territory, eliminating intermediaries and promotion of Christianity was an important element here. At the same time, what we see that Renaissance, I have already discussed in my previous video that Renaissance, due to this Renaissance spirit or Renaissance spirit, what happened? Scientific temperament was promoted. There was development in the field of science, technology, inventions, and we see the new instruments were invented like caravels, like astrolabes, like compass, cartography was there, gunpowder, artillery. All these, you can say that inventions, all are not new inventions, some are new, but some are improvement. So this will make the long distance navigation very easy. This will make the sea voyages safer. Astrolabes will do the latitude measurement. Compass will be helpful in direction finding. Cartography will be helpful in accurate sea mapping. Gunpowder artillery will be helpful in establishing dominance or superiority as a naval power, and this all will help the Portuguese. So here we see that the rise of Portuguese took place. So 1498 was the year when Vasco da Gama reached Calicut, Malabar coast, and he was welcomed by the local ruler Samudri Raja, that is Zamorin. We all know this. It means that the foreigners are coming to India, Europeans are coming to India, and the local rulers are welcoming them. The foreigners, the Europeans are having this mentality that we have to eliminate the intermediaries, and here the businessmen or the intermediaries are welcoming their presence in India. This shows that we were having a very progressive outlook towards trade and commerce. This happened. So it was possible here. Now Europeans came here. Now when Portuguese came to India, they realized that there was no centralized naval power. Yes, there was political fragmentation. It was 15th century, but still we see that India was ruled by, yes, there were Mughal rulers, there were many independent rulers too in the country. So they were seeing that because 1498 is the time period when we say that this is the phase where decline of Delhi Sultanate authority in South India took place. It means South India was facing a kind of political fragmentation, decline of Sultanate authority. So this is lack of centralized naval power. Vijayanagar, Bahmani, and you can say new independent Sultanate came into existence, but still Portuguese are looking at all these events as the opportunity. So when Portuguese came, when Vasco da Gama came, it's not like that they came and they got immediate success. No, this is a myth. They did not got immediate success. They will have to face a lot of challenges because they are having this mentality that we have to eliminate the intermediaries. They are having that medieval crusading spirit. So obviously the Arab merchants will not like them. So Arab merchants will try to counter the presence of Portuguese. This is one important thing. And second important thing is that Portuguese came to India. They're saying that we are here for trade and commerce. But for trade and commerce, you need some commodities which are high in demand in India, and they are lacking those commodities. So basically, they are purchasing goods from India and selling it to the European markets. This is their main agenda. Okay. So in this way, they are trying to eliminate the intermediaries. So we see that when Portuguese came, they realized the importance of being a maritime power. So they will do what? They will try to control the important maritime routes. They will try to establish their dominance and superiority over the Indian Ocean, and they will introduce trade and commerce that is militarized in nature, and this is completely new in this Indian Ocean world trading network. So this was a kind of structural rupture. So I hope that you have understood that why Portuguese came to India. The structural crisis in Europe, the fall of Constantinople, Ottoman blockade of sea routes, the rise of centralized monarchies in Europe, and that's why Portuguese or Prince Henry the Navigator supported Portuguese enterprise, the religious zeal that we are having, extension of the medieval crusading spirit, Indian political fragmentation, Delhi Sultanate was declining, and the presence in South India, we see the new kingdoms were arising. So this appeared to be a favorable circumstance for the Portuguese. And at the same time, what we see that mercantilism, in previous video I have discussed this, mercantilism, new state economic policy of the state is popular in European countries, and now the state has become merchant itself. And due to this bullion crisis, the states in Europe, they tried to increase their export and minimize their import. This was also one most important motive. So in this way, the European intervention first by Portuguese started in Indian Ocean trade and commerce, and this militarization of trade and commerce was a new thing, and in this way the long distance colonial transformation will take place. So what European did, they started maritime imperialism. Now what is maritime imperialism? This word is very much important. While writing answer, you will use this word. We are saying maritime imperialism was started by Portuguese. So it is a kind of empire building effort. When we say maritime imperialism, so it means that maritime imperialism is a kind of maritime building effort. And when we say maritime building effort, so it is a kind of empire building effort. So how this empire will be built. So this empire will be built by establishing control over ocean routes. This is one important point, that this maritime empire could be built by establishing control over the ocean routes, by increasing the naval superiority. By increasing the naval superiority, this can be done. The third and most important part of this empire building is that developing bases, military bases in the coastal areas that are strategic in nature. It means developing a strategic coastal bases, and these strategic coastal bases will help in improving naval superiority. And finally, with the help of all these, you will try to establish or develop monopoly over trade and commerce. So this is also an important part, that developing monopolies over trade and commerce. So if you will develop monopolies over trade and commerce using this strategy, so this is what this is: militarization of trade and commerce. The same thing will be called what? Militarization of trade and commerce. And here what we see, that in this word has been used, maritime imperialism. It means that yes, there will be territorial annexations, territorial penetration, but this will be very much limited. So in the case of Portuguese, we see what? Very limited territorial. In the case of Portuguese, we see very limited territorial penetration. It means they were not like British. They were having very limited territorial penetration. They were controlling some areas, but these areas were used as the strategic centers for trade and commerce. The Portuguese, unlike Britishers tried to establish control over the larger territories. They tried to develop a land revenue system. Their focus was also on collecting land revenues and gaining profits from that. But here Portuguese lacked this approach. They were having very limited territorial penetration. Now what will happen? I told you that naval superiority is an important part. So in this naval superiority, there will be ships or vessels, and these ships or vessels will be mounted with heavy artillery. This is an important point. The ships and vessels will be mounted with heavy artillery, and cannon based naval warfare will be used. So here the ships or vessels will be mounted with heavy artillery. The second point is that cannon based ship or naval warfare will be used as a policy, and this will make their navy superior. It means now the ships or vessels are carrying cannons along with the goods. What they are carrying? They are carrying only goods, or they are also carrying cannons? They are also carrying cannons, and that's why we use the term militarization of trade. Some historians are having this opinion that when Europeans came to India, in one hand they were having Bible, and in another hand they were having gun. So it symbolizes what? In one hand they were having Bible, it means they were trying to promote Christianity, and in another hand they were having gun. It means that here cannons or militarization of trade was done, and this was a completely new thing in the context of Indian Ocean. And in territories, the Portuguese will try to develop limited control over the territories, but the territories which they will try to control here will be coastal territories. Because these coastal territories will be helpful in this maritime imperialism. For example, Portuguese established control over Goa in which year? 1510. In the same way, Diu, Cochin, Basin, all these were the areas. Diu, Daman Diu, Cochin, Basin. So these were the important areas where Portuguese tried to establish their control, and they also tried to uh, establish their control over important choke points. For example, outside India, they tried to establish their control over Hormuz. In Southeast Asia, they tried to establish control Malacca. Okay, so all these were the part of their efforts of maritime imperialism. The ports which were controlled by the Portuguese were militarized. The commercial centers, the ports that were controlled by the Portuguese were militarized. The commercial centers which were controlled by the Portuguese were militarized. The administrative headquarters which were controlled by the Portuguese were militarized. So what we see here, we see militarization. Okay, so this is an important point here. This is the difference. Now, you must have heard about Cartaz system, that is also known as naval pass system. I think that you might have heard about this Cartaz system or naval pass system. Blue water policy of the Portuguese. Cartaz system, naval pass system, blue water policy. What was this blue water policy that was followed by Portuguese? So the policy was to establish dominance and control in Indian Ocean. How they are trying to establish their dominance and control? By militarizing trade and commerce. And the naval pass system, that is also known as Cartaz, the naval pass system that is also known as Cartaz is part of this blue water policy and maritime imperialism. So what was this naval pass system? All the merchant ships that were doing trade and commerce using this Arabian Sea or using this Indian Ocean trade route will need Portuguese permit to do trade and commerce. It means that once they discovered this new sea route, they established their dominance and control over this new sea route. They have started dadagiri in this new sea route, and they are saying that if you are using this sea route, so you need what? A license or permit, and this license or permit will be given by Portuguese. If you don't have this license, and if you get license, what you will have to do? You will have to pay fee to the Portuguese. License fee you will pay. Second important thing, you will give all the records of the goods and commodities that is carried by the ship. It means that whatever you are carrying in the ship or vessel, all proper records or documents should be given to the Portuguese. If in case the goods and commodities that are contained in the ships and vessels, they don't match with the record produced before the Portuguese, so it will be considered as an act of smuggling and it will be confiscated. It means that if you don't have pass, the ships will be seized, the goods and commodities may be confiscated. By using force, ships may be attacked and drowned. If you have not furnished the accurate details, in that case also the ships will be, your goods will be confiscated. Which port you are going to use, what is the destination where you are going to supply these goods, each and every information you will have to share with the Portuguese. And this system is known as Cartaz system. So this was developed by the Portuguese in Indian Ocean and Arabian Ocean. So many historians are having this opinion that before Europeans came, before Portuguese came, the existing system and the existing trading network in Asia, trading network of Asia with Europe, it was very healthy. But when Europeans entered, when Portuguese entered, they used violence and they disrupted this system. This is an important point. So this is a kind of policy that we say that they tried to establish trade monopoly by use of force or coercive means or techniques. Okay, they did not want to be middlemen. They wanted to dominate the entire trade and commerce. And they started with trade. They were having the ambitions to build empire, but Portuguese failed to build the empire. They were the pioneers in India, but they failed to build the empire. For example, with respect to the Portuguese presence in India, if you will trace out the phases about the Portuguese presence in India, so this is the first phase, 1498 to 1505 AD, and this is considered as the commercial entry. This is considered as the commercial entry of Portuguese in India. And from 1505 to 1510, what we see from 1505 to 1510, in these 5 years, you will see that Portuguese made their efforts for the militarization of trade and commerce. This is the time period where Portuguese made their effort for militarization of trade and commerce. And 1510 onwards, we see their focus is on territorial acquisitions. But here an important point that I have already discussed with you, that whenever they are focusing on territorial acquisitions, this effort is very limited. They will try to acquire only those territories which are coastal and strategic in nature. It means those territories which will be helpful in developing this maritime imperialism or naval superiority. These territories will be focused by the Portuguese. They will try to maintain their presence there. Okay, so this is an important point. So in first phase, the Portuguese traders came in contact with Indian businessmen. Vasco da Gama reached at Calicut. The Zamorins, local rulers, Samudri Raja, welcomed Vasco da Gama. So here Portuguese came in contact with Indian merchants and Arab merchants. This is the commercial entry. They came in contact with Indian merchants and Arab merchants. Now, if you want to maintain your presence, you will have to get support and assistance of local rulers or local elites or local merchant communities. If you want to make their presence in India in initial phases, you will have to get the support of the local people, local elites. It means initial phases, the Portuguese did not have any territorial ambition. First, they wanted to make their presence here. So initial phases, territorial ambition, okay, this was neglected. But here one important challenge that was faced by the Portuguese is that the Indian rulers or the local rulers did not consider Portuguese as equals. They were discriminated. The Arab traders who were present in India, in southern India, the western coast, they considered Portuguese as a threat. So obviously they will create some obstructions for the Portuguese, and Portuguese will realize this. And what we see that 1505 onwards, when they got their first viceroy, we are using the word viceroy. Why we are using the word viceroy? Because the Portuguese viceroy, the supreme officer here, was the representative of Portuguese crown. And Portuguese company in India was not basically a joint venture company. It was a Portuguese enterprise. It was not like a company like a Dutch company or British company. So here, the first viceroy, when he came to India, what happened? Francisco de Almeida, what will happen? The conflict with the Arab traders and merchants, okay, will come to the surface. It means that Arab traders and merchants had realized the ambitions of the Portuguese. So first they will have conflict with the Arab traders and merchants. It means that in second phase, what is happening? Previously, the Portuguese were trying to do peaceful trade, but here now the peaceful trade agenda was exposed. Now what is happening here? Now armed trade and commerce was promoted by Portuguese. It means now they wanted to eliminate the main rivals that were the Arab merchants. And 1510 onwards, what happened? 1510 is conquest of Goa by Alfonso de Albuquerque. So 1510 is the first most important conquest, that is the conquest of Goa. Okay, and Goa will become the center for Portuguese in India. So Goa became the capital of Portuguese enterprise, that is the Estado de India. So gradually, when Goa became their stronghold, their center, we can say that yes, the journey, okay, was like this. First they started as a traders, then they fought wars with the local rulers and local merchants, Arab merchants, that is military intervention, and lastly, by establishing their control over Goa, okay, they also expressed their desire of having some limited territorial sovereignty. This is an important point, okay, and most important competition is the competition with the Arab traders. This is an important point. Now there is an important question here, that the Portuguese arrival in India or the Portuguese conquest, Portuguese presence in India, should it be taken as beginning of colonialism? Okay, so there is a major debate here. A few arguments say that yes, it was a colonialism, but a few arguments will establish this fact that no, it was not colonialism, it was basically a kind of commercial militarism. Why some people are having this view that it should be considered as the beginning of colonialism? It means that the Portuguese presence in India, should it be considered as a colonialism? Okay, so there are two groups. One group will support this idea that yes, it was a colonialism. The second group will support that it was not colonialism, it was commercial militarism. It was not colonialism, but it was commercial militarism. So the arguments in support is that colonialism because Portuguese established control over Goa, and when I will discuss later that Goa emerged as a center of their social cultural policies also, you will relate it much better. So this is a kind of territorial annexation. This is a kind of territorial annexation. The missionary activities were promoted on large scale in Goa. I will also discuss later the inquisitions in Goa that was a part of Padroado system. So this all shows that Portuguese tried to impose their sovereignty over Goa. They are interfering in the social cultural policy and the practices that the people in Goa were following. They were trying to promote the missionary activity. They came with the system of inquisitions. By using force, they distorted trade and commerce. They tried to monopolize trade and commerce by using force, and finally they also established a kind of legal administrative system, administrative system, municipal system in Goa that was based on Portuguese model. And the scholars say that this is a kind of European colonial penetration to India. So these arguments suggest that it was a colonialism, but largely there are counter arguments which says that Portuguese did not have vast territorial ambitions. Their territorial ambitions was very much limited. That I have already discussed with you, that the Portuguese territorial ambitions was very much limited. They were more focused on establishing control over the coastal areas. This is an important point. The second important point is that Portuguese did not try to penetrate deeper into the interior parts of India like the British did. The Portuguese did not try to develop a land revenue system. Their focus was not to establish control over the land revenue, getting profits from that like the Britishers did. They tried to develop this land revenue system. Okay, one important source of income was the land revenue that they were controlling from India. The Portuguese did not try to restructure the agrarian system of India. The British tried to restructure the agrarian system of India. Okay, and the Portuguese still depended on Asian merchants. So this is one important point. So yes, there were some limitations of Portuguese empire, and these limitations are the reasons that the Portuguese presence in India appears to be commercial militarism. I hope that you have understood this point. Okay. When British will come 1600 onwards, the situations are changed. Here what we see that Portugal, the country is very small. The country is having a very small population, so they lacked manpower. The British were also having a very small size of population, but the policies of British are different from their predecessors. The Portuguese company was not a joint venture company. The Portuguese company was basically a crown funded system, state sponsored company. Okay. The missionary activities in India was also directly supported by the crown. So there were more interferences and limited capital. So this will create another challenge before the Portuguese enterprise in India. And Portuguese had an overstretched network all around the world. It means that this overstretched network was beyond their capability to rule. They were present in some parts of Africa, some parts of Brazil. They were also having this Indian network. And later, what we see that the Portuguese got the challenges from the good competitors, capable and excellent competitors like Dutch and English. English were the most efficient competitors. So what we see that Portuguese failed to make an empire in India like the British did later. So there are some limitations of Portuguese also. Okay. Portuguese focused on developing maritime empire. British focused on developing territorial empire. This is one reason that British were successful in making empire in India. Portuguese were only focused to establish their control over coastal and strategic territories. The British were having this idea of establishing control over the coastal and strategic territories, but at the same time they were also making efforts for inland expansion in India. This is the reason that British were successful in developing empire in India. The main source of revenue or the income that this Portuguese enterprise was generating was from the blue water policy and cartage system, and it will not be a permanent system, because when you will get tough challenger competition from the Dutch and English merchants and ships, if they are also powerful, so in that case your revenue will come down. The same happened with the Portuguese also. Their dependence was heavily on the cartage system and the income generated from that cartage system. But when we look at the British, we see that British focused on land revenue settlements. They focus on generating income from the land revenue sources. Portuguese were more focused or inclined for promoting their missionary activity or zeal. On the other side, British were more focused on promoting commercial capitalism. So this is an important point. So Portuguese efforts in India or Portuguese presence in India, okay, yes, it can be called as imperialism, but it was a kind of pre-modern imperialism. And when we talk about the British who were successful in making India as their empire, part of the empire, so it was a kind of mature colonial capitalism. So yes, there is a difference between these two. I hope that you have understood. So how do you look at this event of 1498? Was it a discovery or was it a disruption. How do you look at this event of Portuguese presence in India? Was it a kind of military commercial expansion or territorial expansion? So the answer is military commercial expansion. Do you agree with the fact that Portuguese presence in India was also carrying the medieval crusading spirit? The answer is yes. So it was not discovery, it was a kind of disruption. The Indian Ocean was already a well-connected commercial zone, and now it was interfered by the Portuguese. Okay, so the trade and commerce was largely military plus commercial. I have already discussed about this idea that militarization of trade and commerce, the choke points, maritime choke points play a very important role. And when we say choke point, it means we are talking about a narrow sea passes, and this narrow sea passes will carry out the large volume of trade and commerce, and whoever will control this sea passes, those who will control this sea passes or choke points, they can tax it, they can block it, and in this way they can dominate the trade and commerce, and Portuguese did this. They developed maritime choke points in 15th 17th century, and they were heavily dependent on profits that is generated from this maritime checkpoint. One important maritime checkpoint was Cape of Good Hope 2, western coast of India, that is Indian Ocean part, that was discovered by Vasco da Gama. The Strait of Hormuz, that was a kind of entrance to the Persian Gulf region, which was controlling all important trade and commerce from India, Persia, Ottoman Empire. It was also controlled by the Portuguese. And Strait of Malacca, between India and South China Sea, the Portuguese were also controlling this. The Portuguese were also controlling some important western Indian ports like Goa, Diu, Cochin and Bassein, and in this way they were making more and more profits. By blue water policy, they were making more and more profits. So I hope that you now understand this topic of maritime imperialism, maritime commercialism. Okay, so this is an important point. Now the next important thing here is that when we talk about the religious policy and the cultural policy of Portuguese in India, we talk about the Padroado system, we talk about the inquisitions, we talk about the forced marriages which were promoted by Portuguese in India. So when you look at these issues, you will develop the idea about the religious and cultural policy of Portuguese in India, how it was different from the policy that was followed by the British in India. So for today, I think that this much is sufficient. Today we have developed some idea about the Portuguese company, about how the Portuguese dominated their presence in India, which kind of policies were followed by Portuguese. So I hope some basic concepts are clear now. In the very next lecture, I will discuss about the religious policy that was followed by the Portuguese, which kind of changes they tried to introduce in society and religion in India, and how did they try to introduce those changes. This also we will discuss. Then we'll also discuss the important viceroys and their achievements. Then we'll discuss that why Portuguese failed in India, what is important reason, and lastly we will discuss about the historiographical perspective of Portuguese presence in India, from colonial history perspective, Marxist historian perspective, nationalist historian perspective, Cambridge historian perspective. We will discuss each and everything. So these are the free YouTube video lectures, and here I will cover the topics one by one. Okay, so I think that 1 or 1.5 hour videos are sufficient enough, because the viewers are not very much, we don't have reach to the viewers. So I think that this much is sufficient. In each and every lecture we will cover a few dimensions, and in this way entire history lectures will be completed. My foundational class lectures are different from what I teach in YouTube videos. YouTube videos are like, you can say that here you will get each and every topic of history, each and every details will be covered, each and every specific issue will be covered. It means that there will be hundreds of videos on my YouTube channel. But when I teach in my foundational classes, what I do is that I come with a more focused coverage of this entire discussion. Okay, and in this way we used to cover our optional classes in 120 classes, but here in YouTube you will get a lot of videos, so this will be helpful for you. If you are doing optional classes somewhere else, and if you find that any particular topic has not been covered in detail by that particular optional teacher, you can come to my YouTube channel and cover that chapter in detail here. So this is the very basic purpose, that I want to fill the gaps. I know that in classes everything is not covered in detail in holistic manner. So wherever you think that there are some weak portions, or in class a few topics have been skipped by the faculties, so you will come to my YouTube channel, watch that video, watch the themes related to that particular chapter, and in this way you will make your concepts clear. And if still you have time, you can watch each and every videos. So thanks to all of you. Thanks for watching this video.